Kinds of interesting things happening in the world and in the news. Can't wait to see what folks' reactions are to some of the things that I'm going to bring up in the news report. And all in that way, this is the World Edition. Steve Rao is actually out and about, probably doing some of that political campaigning that he does and some of that political work that he does, because actually the campaign season is not going on at this particular time. But we do know that he has talked about different offices that he may want to go for at some point or another. So he will be back tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll have a full discussion around what's going on in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, the World Edition will be dedicated to that, as will, of course, the show right after that, which is about Ukraine, Russia, and China. So we should have a full discussion as we get ready to go into the year anniversary, and I'm sure that we'll get into some conversation around that here on the World Edition today as well. As a matter of fact, some of the news stories that I am seeing is that Russia is paying increased attention to boosting its nuclear forces. So that is one of the things that folks are saying. And of course, there is some concern about that as people are thinking about a potential full-fledged World War III and all in that nature, particularly as China-Russia cooperation is going on. And some people are saying that maybe China's trying to play peacemaker in the Ukraine war in order to woo Europe. And of course, we do know that China has a lot of things going on in Europe and the United States as well. So it'll be interesting to see what this whole conversation goes on and whether this is something that leads us further into a greater involvement of all of the countries, or if it pushes us away from that involvement and actually gets into some sort of settlement, maybe a stalemate or something along those lines. But it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, particularly as there is definite reports that Russia's economy is hurting, despite what Putin and others may be thinking is going on, and all in that way. But definitely, China has said that its relationship with Russia is solid as a rock, and Russia's economy is definitely shrugging off after this year-long war and all in that space. So it ought to be interesting to see what folks have to say about that. And by the way, speaking of China, they just had a mine collapse. That's right. More bodies were found in a China mine collapse, and 48 are remaining missing. And of course, there are some strong earthquakes near China, or near the border with China, in Tajikistan. Probably mispronounced that, but that's all right. That's the way life goes, and all in that space. And definitely, Turkey is slashing its policy rates by 50 basis points as country continues to reel from those earthquakes that they had. So they are dealing with some economic issues as well. So that is some of the things that folks are seeing. And of course, we are seeing more and more support from the European nations for what is going on there in Ukraine, and trying to help those Ukrainians as they continue battling against Russia. Here in the United States, there's some interesting things going on, and I've definitely got to hear what folks have got to say about this. I had mentioned it earlier on after the show to one of our founders of the network, but you know, sometimes people on all of the parties, both the Democrats and the Republicans, have some very interesting ideas. And apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene has been putting out this idea of a national divorce. She was saying that maybe the red states and the blue states need to be separated, and that there should be a national divorce. Not saying that there can't be some unique things that happen in the whole nature of marriage and divorce. After all, I do live in Durham, North Carolina, which actually had a whole event around getting married to the city. So that was a event that was done, and part of that was to encourage people to be supportive of their various causes, whether that was environmental causes, race relations, or a number of other things in that space. As a matter of fact, there were 2 marriage ceremonies, and there was even been talk in the past of having some sort of anniversary celebration or something along those lines. Because as I recall, one was done 1 year, and then a few years later there was another effort. But yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about this national divorce. People in her party are not exactly pleased with what she is saying. As a matter of fact, Fox's own Laura Ingraham is calling this idea just a like almost total insanity, and that's my words and not hers and everything. But she did attack the proposal, saying, now why would we want to embrace the states that gave us Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, but essentially give up on the states that gave us Reagan and Trump? Imagine if Youngkin had given up on Virginia, or if Republicans on Long Island gave up on New York. The last thing we need is an American breakup of any sort. Former Democratic presidents Carter and Clinton came from Georgia and Arkansas, respectively, which are traditionally seen as Republican states, while there is no doubt Reagan was born in Illinois and Trump in New York, and Reagan was also governor over there in California. And all of those are seen as definitely Democratic kind of leaning places and that way. But Ingraham also continued, just because it often seems like Democrats have given up on America themselves doesn't mean ever that Republicans or conservatives should. They should not. I'm certainly not willing to give up on the state that gave us Sinatra, John Wayne, or that welcomed my grandparents from Poland. There are hardworking people in Illinois, in New York, in California, and Washington states who don't want to move and are looking for a new leadership. So let's give it to them. But the Fox News host also told House Republican Matt Gaetz that Greene's proposal would give Democrats a bat to use against us in 2024. She did partially give a partial defense of Greene's comments before discussing woke ideology in schools. He said, I think, Gaetz, that is, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is making an invigorated argument for federalism, which I think a lot of voters would ascribe to. I don't think it's helpful when we have Democrats trying to divide us, even divide parents from their own children by pushing woke ideology in the classroom. And on Wednesday, which was yesterday, Greene again promoted her national divorce plan, arguing it would help prevent the U.S. from being on the verge of World War III with Russia and China following Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. She tweeted, in a national divorce, our Department of Defense would defend America's borders, not be on the verge of World War III with Russia and China, because our overly powerful federal warlords serve Ukraine first. And definitely there are folks in her own party, including Mitt Romney, the former Republican presidential nominee, who is definitely not going for this idea. The senator replied, I think Abraham Lincoln dealt with that kind of insanity. We're not going to divide the country. It's united we stand, divided we fall. So that's what was going on in that part of the world. I do have a very special guest that I'm going to bring up as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about race relations and some of the statistics that have gone on that he's been doing research on. I'd actually reached out to him as interested to hear some of what we are hearing, even about unemployment figures and things along those lines. So I'm going to bring on Algernon Austin and hear some of his comments. And then, of course, we've got our guest as well. So, Algernon, I know that you were part of this amazing study. And, of course, we got some other news stories that we'll get to as well. But I know that you were part of this amazing study that I had heard about. And that's when I reached out to you. I think it was through RTIR and that newsletter that they put out and everything. But if you could just tell a little bit about this study that you've got. We're actually, I think, one of the first people to actually be reporting on this study. So I'm glad to be in the lead in that regard. So if you could tell a little bit about this study and what you found on this study, I'm sure that our listeners would be quite interested in hearing about it.
So, yes, I've done a number of pieces recently, and the latest is titled Black Women's Views on Black Men's High Rate of Joblessness. And this report highlights the fact that for the last 2 decades, there are typically about 1 million more Black women who are employed than Black men. For each year, there are about 1 million more Black women. And this is unique to the Black population. For all other populations, there are more men working than women. So we have this unusual circumstance. And it just highlights, I did the report to really highlight the very low employment rates for Black men. And this is a problem that has not received sufficient attention and sufficient sort of policy response. So Black men suffer from a very low rate of a very high rate of joblessness, very low rate of employment, because the decline in American manufacturing hit Black men particularly severely. Manufacturing sector was a very good sector for men without a college degree, in particular, and Black men more so than white men, for example, don't have college degrees. So they relied a good bit more than a number of other groups on manufacturing jobs, but with deindustrialization and with the loss of manufacturing to other places in the world, Mexico, China, etc., that really hit Black men and Black communities more broadly very hard. Additionally, since the 70s, we've seen a ramp up of mass incarceration. And that means that and that also disproportionately hurt Black men. And employers do not like, there is discrimination against individuals who were formerly incarcerated in the labor market, as well as discrimination against individuals who are Black in the labor market. So both of those things have also had a very significant negative impact on the employment opportunities for Black men. Let me say a little bit more about the racial discrimination in the labor market, because sometimes people don't fully appreciate it. There have been a number of studies, really, there was a recent review of 25 years of these studies where researchers have sent out Black and white candidates to apply to similar jobs, and the candidates are trained. They're called testers. It's an experimental study. So the researchers train the applicants and say, okay, this is your script. You have these qualifications, and you present this to employers. So white and Black candidates are presenting equivalent qualifications to employers, and they consistently find that the employers are more likely to hire the white candidate, although the Black candidate has the same qualifications. Similarly, other researchers have, instead of sending out individuals, have used resumes. So they send out similar resumes, but one resume has a stereotypical white name, and the another resume has a stereotypical Black name. And they consistently find, again, that the stereotypical white name gets better responses from employers than the one with the stereotypically Black name. So, and we've seen this, decade after decade, this type of discrimination. And as I mentioned, so we've got deindustrialization, we've got racial discrimination in the labor market, we've got racial discrimination and other issues in our criminal justice system that then impacts the labor market. So mass incarceration and people returning from prison, if you're Black and you have a criminal record, it becomes very difficult for you to find employment. So all of these things, as well as other things, but those are some of the major ones, have led to an extremely low rate of employment for Black men. And what the report highlights is that it's a serious concern for a variety of reasons for Black women. So, 80% of Black women are worried about this problem, and rightfully so, because this means that their families are being harmed. So this means that their sons are less likely to find employment. Their brothers are less likely to find employment. Their husbands and boyfriends are less likely to find employment. So it places both an emotional burden and an economic or financial burden on Black women. So that's what the report is highlighting, the burden of this high rate of joblessness on Black women and by extension, Black families and Black communities.
And along those same lines, and I'm going to bring in some of my other panelists as well. I was just wondering, because we've talked about this before on the show, how much systematic racism plays a part as well. Because I know that when I've talked to some of my fellow panelists, there are some that are not as much willing to accept the fact that in 2023, systematic racism is taking place. I argue that it is still taking place with the police force and banking and housing and a number of other things. But I was just wondering what your take is on that and even some of the studies.
Absolutely. I mean, our schools are still de facto separate and unequal. I mean, you go to a predominantly Black school, and then you go to a predominantly white school, and you'll find that there's a significant difference in resources. You know, in the amount of resources, the quality of education is different. We're still racially, in terms of housing, we're still a segregated society. I mentioned in terms of employment. One of the recent pieces that I did, if you look just at the unemployment rate, the Black unemployment rate has been twice the white unemployment rate for the last 60 years. You know, for 60 years, we've made no progress on that. That is a structural inequality in the American labor market, that persistent disadvantage. So on multiple measures, you find these inequalities in terms of opportunities and in terms of all other types of measures, economic measures.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm going to bring in some of the other panelists. I'm sure they may have some questions as well. But as I mentioned earlier, I do know that was whole conversation around this national divorce, which some people may say could lead it to another version of a civil war and everything. And one of the things that I saw that Jason Nichols was writing about was that folks might be careful what they wish for, because a national divorce could also impoverish the red state. So it could be
that's the first thing that came to mind. I mean, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of false and empty rhetoric in American politics. But one thing that people don't realize and don't appreciate is that, you know, a lot of the red states get more from many of the red states get more from the federal government than they pay in. So in a sense, the blue states provide significant financial support to the red states. So if there was this type of divorce, I mean, a number of red states like Mississippi and Kentucky, et cetera, already have pretty high rates of poverty. If they were to lose that federal revenue, you know, the amount of poverty and economic hardship would just increase tremendously. So, you know, it just shows that some of these politicians simply don't know what they're talking about, and they spout really absurd and ridiculous ideas without having facts behind what they're saying.
No, definitely there. I want to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes. I know that in the past, Lee Newton Rhodes has brought up the notion of family values and family kind of background. And I know that there have been a couple of times that he's talked about things around even the racial divide as well, because he has oftentimes asked me whether there should be more efforts to help some of those African-American women that are being struck this way and everything in that nature. But I'll let Lee speak for himself. I don't want to put words in the man's mouth, and if he's got questions that he wants to ask as well. And of course, I do have Sasha from Canada by way of Ukraine, and Dan Worthington will be joining as well. But Lee, any thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I had a whole bunch of thoughts, but I'm going to start off. First of all, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure meeting you. One tricky thing is when you do interviews and you send in white candidates and you send in non-white candidates, to be careful that the assumptions are it's because of color that the interviewer is making decisions as opposed to personalities. Even if on paper the candidates look alike, this person has to say, I'm going to be with this person 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Do I want to work with this person? And that sometimes has nothing to do with color, it's personality. So I think we jump to conclusion that it's because of the color only.
Yeah, so as well, yes, that is a concern. That is a legitimate concern. But these researchers, these are social scientific studies using an experimental
Right.
methodology, and they train. They don't just randomly send people out. They train the candidates to present the same information in the same way. So that's one, but I mentioned there are two types of studies. There are the experimental studies where they send people out. And yes, that's a legitimate question. Are the people, giving off the same
Vibes.
affect, etc.?
Right.
And are there interpersonal dynamics? But the second study just sends out paper. It's just a resume.
No, I understand that.
And the only thing that's different is one person's name is like Jeff, and the other person's name is Jamal. And although the resumes are essentially the same, Jeff gets more positive. Jeff gets called in for interview, but Jamal doesn't. And you have to wonder, well, what is that? Why is Jamal?
No, I understand that, but in studies like that, like that, are they also putting in Japanese names, Israeli names, Korean names, Indian names? Also, are just strictly Jeff and Jamal?
These are stereotypically white names and stereotypically black names in these studies. There are different ones, but the ones that I'm talking about are these, and that's what you see. You see this consistently that the Jamal and Lakeisha are not getting the invitations for interviews. They're not getting the calls.
Yeah. And one other thing before everyone else jumps in terms of the unemployment rate, my understanding is whether you like Trump or not, during his years, black unemployment was at its lowest. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we did see a historically low black unemployment rate during the Trump years, and now we've returned to that. So in the Biden years, so we're back in a similar economic space. However, that's a low rate for black people. That same rate for white people would not be considered a good rate, and that's because the black rate is always, for the last 60 years, always about 2 times the white rate. So we have this this very durable structural inequality in the American labor market. And the other thing, let me go a little further. Even controlling for, even looking at the same educational attainment. So let me, in the report that just came out,
Algernon?
Yes.
Yeah, the report, is it strictly looking at skin color, or is there a differentiation between American blacks versus Jamaican blacks, Nigerian blacks? Because if it's strictly skin color, I don't know that that's true, because I see there's a difference between the hiring rates based on country of origin versus strictly skin color. Am I wrong?
Yeah. that's let me come back to that. I'll make a note of that.
Interesting.
Let me come back to that, but I want to make this point about the unemployment rate. Just go a little deeper, and even if, and this is just in the report, I'm just looking at black men, and if you look at this is 2019, so this is during that historically low Trump unemployment rate period, and so for white men who did not have a high school diploma, had an unemployment rate of 4.4%, which, by the way, so these are people who did not complete high school.
Can I ask, where did
and their unemployment rate is lower than the overall Black unemployment rate, lower than the overall. But for Black men, for white men it's 4.4. For Black men who also did not complete high school, it's 9.3. So more than twice. Even for Black men who completed high school, who has the high school diploma, it's 6.6. So if you're a Black man with a high school diploma, your odds of finding employment are worse than a white man who has dropped out of high school.
And what's the number for Black women?
This report, Black women, it will be a little similar. This report was highlighting the joblessness for Black men, but the numbers for Black women tends to be somewhat a little bit lower, but not that much lower. To the issue of immigrants, yes, we can see differences at times. In some measures, you do see differences at times for immigrants, but that just sort of highlights the problem. I would say that you still see Black immigrants. There have been research, and Black women immigrants have worse outcomes than white immigrants also. So you do see that inequality in the labor market too. The Black immigrant population, with immigration, you have to recognize that there is that immigrants tend not to be a sort of random sample of the sending country. So, for example, if you were to look at Nigerian immigrants, for example, they're going to be disproportionately college educated, maybe middle class. So
okay,
you're not really comparing.
No, but you are. But you are when you're
full range of people from Nigeria.
But if you're looking at candidates in an interview, on paper they all match. So you are comparing apples to apples. And someone from Nigeria.
And I said that in the studies they do compare, resumes with the stereotypically white name, stereotypically Black name. I'm not aware of any where they did it looking at sort of U.S. born Blacks and Black immigrants in one study, but that would be interesting. I'm not familiar with any research like that, and I will look and see if I can find any.
Thank you,
Algernon. Just really quickly, I was just curious about the book, because you did write a book as well, and I was going to get to that because one of the arguments that you brought up was that America is not post-racial, and you brought up xenophobia and Islamophobia, racism, and the 44th president. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that book and how that book came about. And for those that are interested, I still forgot to say some of your own background, because I do know that you are working with certain organizations and all in that space. So folks might be going like, who is this Algernon? But you are the Director of Race and Economic Justice at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. So that is a part of your background. And you are also the former director of the Economic Policy Institute's program on race, ethnicity, and the economy. So definitely have some of those things going on. And I also worked at Wesleyan as well. So just wanted to mention some of your own stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, so people can find my current research at the website for the Center for Economic Policy research. That's CEPR.net. So CEPR.net that's my current organization, the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And one thing that I'm very much involved, so we're talking about the high rate of joblessness for Black men, and one of the policy solutions that I'm pursuing is what we're calling full employment for all. which is a national subsidized employment program that targets communities that face persistently high rates of joblessness. So it will benefit, if we get this established, it will benefit communities that face persistently high rates of joblessness. So places like Flint, Michigan, but also much of Appalachia, and also, places in, like Apache County, the Native American population and indigenous population. There are so people of all races in every state, in every single state. You can find these communities that suffer from high rates of joblessness among all races. So fullemploymentforall.org, you can find out more.
So people will be working. Right?
Yeah. Are you finding a correlation between those communities with high unemployment to very low graduation rates in high school?
Yeah, you do find you do find educational correlation. But the other thing too, but you also find, there in every state you do find there's variation. You find I mentioned the loss of manufacturing, so you find the loss of, these are places that suffered from deindustrialization, these places that suffered from shifting industries in Appalachia.
That's all valid, and I agree. But these people can go to other type of jobs where education plays more of a part, whether they go to college or not.
Yeah, education is important, but getting back to what I was saying, if we're looking at the, specifically for African Americans, we do find that even at the same level of educational attainment, you still find that the Black unemployment rate tends to be significantly higher, and in many cases double. So I was talking about less than high school. It's more than double. High school levels, more than double.
Along those same lines, do you think that we're seeing enough people that are in the minority community that are going into newer technologies and newer jobs? I do know that there has been a rising rate and a rising amount of folks that are getting into technology jobs, and definitely there has been whole efforts to have like Black Girls Code and things in that kind of ways. But do you think that the minority community in general, not just the African American, but also the Hispanic and other communities, are getting enough into some of these new jobs? And some of these new jobs don't necessarily require a college degree. I have a very good friend that is in the whole metaverse space, and I don't think that they completed their college, but they are very much involved in that lane and know quite a bit about that lane. So there are some of these jobs that if you are learning at the ground level, you might be able to do better than even some of our college graduates. I just wondering.
Mark, some of the metaverse is dominated by non-whites from India, from Japan, China.
True.
Yeah, so in the tech sector, in STEM, we do find a decent share of African Americans moving into that space, or who are already not moving in, who are already in that space. So yes, that is important, and yes, there is encouragement. However, at the highest level of tech, if you go to Silicon Valley employers, you find very low. That workforce suffers from very low diversity in terms of having Blacks, Latinos, and women. Not very good, and I would argue they could do a lot better than they are doing. If you look at the tech sector around DC or Atlanta, you find that it's much more racially diverse than in Silicon Valley.
I have a question, and
can I just say one more thing? We do focus a lot on tech and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math occupations. And those are important. Those are very high paying, very lucrative, very important to the economy. But Richard Reeves at the Brookings Institution has said we also need to look at HEAL, which is health, education, arts, and literacy. So some of the occupations that are growing the most are in healthcare, for example, healthcare, education, and these, getting back to the issue of joblessness for Black men, men are underrepresented in these heel occupations. So both Richard Reeves and myself are saying, look, we need to get more men into these heel, particularly healthcare occupations. And we need to make sure that these occupations are good jobs. Unfortunately, the working conditions can be pretty stressful and difficult, like in the nursing area.
Sure.
And for nurses' aides, the wages and benefits are just extremely low. So we need a lot of work to build up our care infrastructure and also get more men involved in the care.
Yeah, and that's difficult everywhere in healthcare. I mean, that's a typical problem in healthcare. I'm going to go back to another issue I think is driving a lot of this, because the idea of the culture of poverty, right? And that affects Blacks and whites and other ethnicities. I grew up in a very poor family, and either my mom or my dad had graduated from high school. And I have Native American heritage as well. And so, part of the problem is when you grow up poor and like that, you don't even know the rules. You don't even understand the connections. You don't have the political connections with the people and the relationships that a lot of people have because they're in a different class, right? And it's just going to be that way for everyone. I happen to be very, very fortunate, and God gave me a brain, so I was able to do more than I probably should have from where I came from. But my point is that the culture of poverty and culture in general among poor whites, Blacks, and others really is a major influence in what we're seeing with respect to educational rates, with respect to propensity to get into illegal activities and join gangs and other things. I mentioned the incarceration rate. Well, that's the thing. You go to prison, it's a little harder to get a job, whether you're white or Black or another race, right? And so, I mean, these are things that affect everybody. It affects Blacks disproportionately because I think the cultural impacts are different for Blacks than they are others as well. But I know it affected me. It affected my family. It affected my brothers and sisters. And growing up in a little town in Idaho with a mother who was on state aid, who was a single mom and young, and I mean, so it's about boo-hoo. But we've got God bless America and a land of opportunity.
No, definitely that, Dan. Very quickly, and I hear where you're going with that. But one of the things I was going to add to that is, part of it, and I'd love to hear Nick's thought about this, is also access. Because if you are African American and from a poor area and committed a crime of whatever sort, the facts are that you are probably going to wind up going and getting a public defense attorney. And I'm not knocking public defense attorneys; they are much needed and much.
Oh, they suck. They suck.
But you're not going to get a.
They just want to make a deal, right?
Some of the other folks in other societies will get a better attorney.
Yeah, but that's true of any poor person. They can't afford $50,000 to hire a lawyer if they make some stupid mistake and have a criminal charge, right? That's just not how it works. So justice isn't equal in that if you're poor, you're going to have a public defender. If you have a public defender, you're going to end up with a plea bargain or some sort of. That's just how it works, and that affects everyone of any race.
Dan, I think you may have misspoke just now. Sorry, Dan. I think you may have misspoke. You're saying people who made a stupid mistake. Sometimes people are innocent, and they didn't do anything wrong.
Yes, and that's true, and that's hard to prove if someone's going to plea bargain, because you have to plead guilty in order to get.
No, I agree with you. I'm saying, but sometimes people don't make stupid mistakes, and they're still in the system.
Well, sometimes they're in circumstance. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. I admit.
You can't beat being in the right place at the right time.
There are many examples of that.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment on.
Thanks for smiling.
Nick, I want to hear your thoughts.
I wanted to make a comment on something Mark said dealing with this particular lady, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and her divorce of America. Now, this is what the media didn't point out that we're going to point out. Marjorie Taylor Greene got dumped by her husband last month, got her own divorce.
Wonder she was so mad.
I'm dead serious.
She was a bitter woman.
The media didn't
we
say
understand
that.
all this, right?
The media
It's irrelevant.
This has the
Go to
context.
Wikipedia and you do some research on her, you'll find that she just got dumped by her own husband last month. So,
Nick, why is that relevant?
So let's have some mercy for the woman, right?
Nick, hold on. I got tease Nick about what he just said, because there was another famous case that is going on.
Then the whole country should get a divorce, and I'm getting a divorce because my own husband.
If I have to be
can't
miserable,
stand me. My own husband can't stand me.
There were some interesting points that were made. Can I respond to them?
Yes, please, Algernon.
She got dumped, baby. She got dumped. Margie Taylor Greene got dumped. Let's listen to Sasha from Canada.
So
I would like to mention something. First of all, she is available. So now there will be a lineup of all eligible men trying to get.
She's on Bumble or whatever that.
Number two, before anybody would make his move on her, one has to really figure out. Obviously, she has no brains, because to propose what she did, there are no brains. But there is something inside, and it would be very interesting to investigate. What's exactly inside of her head? Remember that old saying, it's me stupid. Remember back in the 80s, in mid-80s, there was a referendum. I'm from Canada, okay? So there was a referendum in Quebec, which is a French-speaking province of Canada, and they had Parti Québécois, and they wanted to get away from the rest of Canada and become a new independent country. So they had the referendum, and believe it or not, the side that was against the division, they squeaked by 0.02%. So they were on verge of actually winning the referendum and getting away from Canada. Right after that, there was a study done, what's happening economically in case if they would win the referendum and Quebec would become an independent country. The study showed that Quebec would collapse in a matter of about a year and a half. It's because they would have to take
well, they are French, right?
That, and it would just economically, it would be absolutely impossible. So before she would make such a proposal, she would have to consult it if she would have brain. Now she has no brain, so I understand the process. So she would have to consult at least somebody how economically it would work, because you can envision, okay, this state's going this way, some of the states going that way. Economically, how it's
Sasha, can you define what she means by a national divorce for me and for the viewers?
No,
how are we defining that term?
Between the red states
the
and the
United
blue
States
states.
of America is going to divorce Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, so what we need to do is really divorce.
Well, she's up for election soon, Nick. That's okay.
Okay,
but how are we defining the term?
Okay, and the thing is, the media didn't point this out, but I think it's great. Her husband, her own husband, for many years, decided he can't even stand her. She didn't file for divorce. He filed for divorce to get rid of her because he can't stand her anymore. Well, we can't stand her either. So I agree. We need a national divorce for Marjorie Taylor Greene. So
they're called
elections, Nick. Hold on a second. Algernon had some points he wanted to respond to, so I was going to let him respond to those points. So I definitely want to get to this because I actually have a publicity question I'm going to ask to everybody. But Algernon, you want to respond?
So there was the issue of do people from poor backgrounds have the connections, have maybe the role models, etc., that would lead them to success, and that is a real issue and a real concern, and I think it probably plays some role, but the other
big role.
There is a study by a sociologist, Deirdre Royster, that an excellent study of this. She went to a Baltimore high school, and this high school had both Black students and white students. She was looking at the young men who graduated, and then she followed them after graduation. Where did they end up in terms of the labor market? And these young men were in the same vocational courses. The Black young men ended up working in McDonald's if they were able to get a job. The white young men were able to get sort of blue collar trade jobs. And why was this? It was not because they had the same education, same grades, etc. So again, it's a pretty decently controlled comparison. But the difference was the trades in Baltimore, it's predominantly white men in those trades, and the white high school students were connected. They were socially connected to the white men in the trades and those networks. So it was a difference in terms of who had access to the job networks, the job information.
It's how it always works.
So you're saying the good old network is real?
That's how Marjorie Taylor Greene basically got her first job, by the way. Listen to how she got her first job.
Hey, Nick, be careful. How did Kamala Harris get her first job?
Marjorie Taylor Greene got her first job because her dad sold the business to his now ex-son-in-law and Marjorie Taylor Greene. So how'd she get her job? Because she's totally unemployable. Okay, is that her dad turned around and gave him the company? Ta-da! All right.
Hey, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I gotta ask you about another case that's in the news. But
I mean, it's horrible. They always
Nick, hold on. I've got to ask you about another question that's in the news as well.
He wants to go and not work for McDonald's. He wants to own a McDonald's franchise. Why don't I hear that, Algernon? Why are we always training people to be employees and not employers? By the way,
I wouldn't want to work for McDonald's.
Employers make a lot more money than the employee, but they always train people to become bloody employees. It's the wrong way to go. I'd rather own my own HVAC company. I came from 3 generations of my parents, my grandparents own printing companies. They own them. They own banks. Let me tell you. So when I started my own law firm, and unemployment in lawyers was way over 10%. So crime here forever. There was frankly no jobs.
He's a trust baby. Don't listen to him.
That's true. I had a lot of
you can't trust a trust baby.
And I'd love to hear Algernon.
Not only that, as I'll tell Shaquille, I'm also
you're saying that why
also
don't we
many
get more
generations
employers that are
royalty from Scottish and the Netherlands.
Hey Nick, you're asking why there aren't more employer-based African American companies. Now, when there have been historically those kind of companies, there has been some destruction of those companies. The Black Wall Streets were very real. I brought that up before and everything, and they were destroyed in one way or another, sometimes deliberately. So definitely there have been efforts now to get more African American owned companies.
Business, Mark. Things go up and down in business, but what they don't do, and this is a disservice in our education system, they don't train people to own their own business. They always train you to be an employee, work for somebody else.
Nick, who's they?
You make more money.
Nick, who's they?
Business, no matter what it is. HVAC business I met yesterday. An HVAC business.
Well,
you don't want to get HVAC. The guy's putting away 300,000 years of retirement plan. Plus,
Algernon,
own your own business, dude. Own your own business. Own your own HVAC.
So if you are able to own a successful business, then that you can be very successful.
And you're the employee.
The if, however, is a pretty big if.
DoorDash, come on, Algernon, there's DoorDash.
Because as you may know, many new businesses fail. The failure rate for starting
that's because they're not willing to work 80 hours a week. What they don't tell you, if you want to own your own business, you want to be successful. And I'm going to get news alert. You want to be successful and you own your own business, work 80 hours a week. They don't tell you that, but I can tell you, if you want to be successful, and all the people I've seen that are successful that own their own business,
well, and you
80
know,
hours
Nick,
a week. They don't work
you also have to have a
40
brain,
hours
right?
and 32 hours.
It helps to have a brain.
You work 80 hours a week. Get used to it.
Yeah, it's very hard, but I would say
No,
that,
it
you
isn't.
know,
It's all about skills, baby. It's all about the skills.
It's
Hey,
still
Algernon,
a competitive market, so it makes it very hard. Like, I think even if you're working 80 hours a week, it
80 hours a week.
It can be very hard. It's not. If it were easy, everybody would do it, right?
Algernon,
the other
working
thing,
for an
the other
employer
thing
is like working
is
for a slave
capital.
master anyway, right?
The other thing is access to capital. You know, having a successful business often requires capital, and the historic
that's why service
discrimination and structural inequality in American society means that Black people
don't get
Algernon,
and contemporary
employers are really the slave owners
situation
of America now, right? The corporate America, not small businesses, but the companies, right? So the companies are the slave owners today. We work a W-2 job. We're all basically slaves to the corporate mentality, to the federal rules, everything else. We serve the man.
That's the reason you want to own your own business.
That's why if you have your own business, you don't have to serve the man so much. You're still regulated by the government, who makes all the rules.
No, but the thing
we have a problem with that.
So it doesn't really matter anymore. They didn't do away with slavery. They just made us all slaves. When we created the federal income tax system, they made us all
own your own business.
You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Own your business.
Actually, Dan earlier mentioned DoorDash, and DoorDash, you are not owning that business. You're actually running the DoorDash.
No, I know DoorDash, the rest of them. I used to work for Intuit and do a lot of consulting for tax work, and it's amazing to see the number of people who actually sucker for the DoorDash and the other things. They end up, they make money, but not on taxes, because they can end up deducting everything for gas and everything else, and they end up actually not having to pay any tax on it because they don't really make any money because of the cost of transportation and everything else. But it's a gig. Some people make good money.
Getting back to, I think people were onto something in that the current labor market, what we're seeing, if you look at the trend in income inequality, you find that the wealthiest 1% has been seeing tremendous growth in income, and
especially LeBron and Shaq. Just look at that. And all the NFL players, the great majority of them.
Listen, they got on the other side of the curve,
all around.
LeBron and Shaq.
I'm shocked.
On the other side
I
of the
feel abused. I want to have my remuneration.
Well, there's people you didn't hear about: Tyler Perry, Roger Smith. They got on the other side of the curve. But guess what? It's amazing. They all now own their own businesses. What a surprise.
Wow.
Yes.
There's Mahomes,
what
amazing guys.
Do we really want to investigate the demographics of the top 1%?
No, not really.
I'm not sure that there is any Black person in that group. There might be one or two.
Elon Musk said it best. When they went to Europe, right? All these 1%, all these 1/10 of percentage that control the world's wealth are the ones calling the shots, making the rules, making government policy.
They are making the rules,
doing all this crap, and those are the guys that are responsible for this mess. Because frankly, our federal government is no longer in control of what's happening in the United States.
Absolutely.
And
so we have to investigate why are there. I forget the exact number, but why are there like hundreds of lobbyists for each person in Congress? And why are these?
Because Congress people are whores. That's
and
why.
And why do you say it's a mess?
Hold on a second. Hold on, Dan. Hold on, Dan. Dan, I'm glad you mentioned that word.
Many
hold on a second.
Many
Dan, hold on a second. I'm glad that you mentioned that word because that was one of the other quick stories I was going to get to because there was a woman that was definitely involved in that whole prostitution lane and everything, and she was recently arrested because she pulled out a gun and shot at some folks. And she was at that famous, infamous Bunny Ranch and everything, and now she's out.
You can't shoot your Johns. That's one of the rules.
But she had a great quote and everything, which I want to hear from
That's not
Nick, his response, but she did say that her emails are skyrocketing. People want bookings and meetups. Maybe Dennis was right, and Dennis was the former owner of that Bunny Ranch. All publicity is good publicity. That's what she tweeted to her followers on Wednesday. So she was referring to that. So is she right? Because apparently,
is she an?
Well, see, there's a nice business opportunity.
Or is she an employee, Mark? Okay, when you work at the Bunny Ranch, I've never done that before. Is she an independent contractor, owns her own business, or is she an employee of the Bunny Ranch? I don't know. You tell me.
Nick,
I don't know.
Maybe Lee knows the answer to that question.
No, my question is: during the pandemic, was it considered an essential service, and they was allowed to stay open?
Probably.
Yeah, it could have been. Maybe she got relief money.
Politicians go to those places.
Think about that.
So
Yeah, the PPP.
they get free gratis, right?
Yeah.
It's a little hard with your mask and everything, but hey, they make it work somehow.
they make it work, but apparently she's going to
Well,
jump.
Yeah,
on
damn it! But the 6 foot social distancing was problematic.
So social distancing was
I'll do that. This could be a good assignment. Do a study on the Bunny Ranch. That would be a pretty interesting thing.
Well,
Probably make a lot of money on it because
I don't know. We want to know if it's racially.
how does the Bunny Ranch really work? And
Yeah, I want to know if it's racially diverse.
curious minds want to know.
Seriously.
Yeah, is it diverse?
I'm sure
How much money they make?
Mark, is it false advertising? Nick, is it false advertising? There's no bunnies there.
There's
No
no
bunnies.
there.
No bunnies.
Yeah, they could have an FTC complaint.
Well, I mean, not in the Playboy sense, maybe.
Right, Sasha waits patiently. He's not like the rest of us. He's from Canada.
I'm from Canada, so I don't expect my
He doesn't
opinion to be.
You don't expect much from Americans, do you?
But I would like to actually tell you that I'm really surprised and shocked by today's discussion. From Canadian point of view, really, I do. Really, I am really surprised because actually, the name of the program somewhere down the line was Racism in America. Now, America, to my knowledge, includes also Canada and Mexico. Does that imply that racism is only in America but not in Mexico and Canada?
Oh, it exists both places.
I don't know much about Mexico. Except that being on holidays 2 times there.
Pina colada, man.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
Now in Canada, I would like to assure you that racism in a
It's
form
alive and well.
described here happening in the United States doesn't exist, and I'll tell you why.
It doesn't exist.
I'll explain to you why.
Do you guys have jails? No violence either?
In Canada?
Excuse me, gentlemen. You'll never learn anything by talking, only by.
Doctor, you're the one talking now.
Okay. I'll try to get my point of view, even if you will keep yapping. Okay, that's fine. American culture. Now, I would like to tell you one thing. That thanks to Portuguese, very humane slave traders, they never brought African slaves to Canada because it's too cold.
Too cold.
So they all went to United States and worked their way through in United States. Does Canada have black people? Yes, it does. But they are completely, entirely different black people from United States. First of all, they don't have blacks from United States.
Sasha?
Some cases.
Sasha?
No, I haven't finished yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there are some people here and there that are coming maybe for educational purposes. Maybe they marry somebody here, but they're moving to this cold country. I don't know why. Okay, there are cases. Now, most of the black population in Canada, they're coming from West Indies. They are coming from European countries, by the way, quite a few, from UK, for example, from France. They are not organized enough to bring all the studies, like, for example, you're doing here and so on. They don't. They just mind their own business. They get to work. Is there discrimination against them? Perhaps. But this is a discrimination similar, I would imagine, that throughout civilization, throughout all the centuries and thousands of years, people were always supporting of their kind. It's happening. I would imagine that, let's see, if there are businesses and say a chimpanzee own a business and there are some gorillas own businesses. So chimpanzees would mostly hire chimpanzees and gorilla mostly would hire gorillas. That's probably how it works through the centuries and generations. And there is nothing you can do about it. You can do all kinds of studies. You can know about, it's inequality, it's discrimination, it's this or that, but doesn't matter. The nature. This is the most important thing, is the nature.
So the Portuguese thought it was too cold in Canada.
Canada's a weird country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of
weird countries, we're a real
country. Speaking of weird countries and everything, I was actually going to let, since Steve is not here, Algernon close, because he did have a couple of things that he wanted to bring up, including that book if he has and everything. So I'm going to drop everybody off and let Algernon have some closing remarks that he might want to make. I figured that was the least we can do for our guests and everything. And
it was a lot of fun, Algernon.
Return trip and all in that space. But that's what I thought we would do, is let Algernon make some closing remarks on the World Edition as we get ready to get on out of here.
Yeah, so it's been a pleasure to be with you all. It's been quite entertaining and interesting. I really, again, I think I want to focus on the present and my current work. And again, you can find my current work at cepr.net for the Center for Economic and Policy Research. I am leading a campaign on full employment for all. You can find out more about it. Fullemploymentforall.org is the website. It's a subsidized employment program that targets communities in the United States with persistently high rates of joblessness. Again, these communities exist in every single state. People of all races are living in communities that suffer from these persistently high rates of joblessness. You can find it in urban areas. You can find it in Appalachia. You can find it in the Southwest. You can find it in Alaska. We need to, President Biden talked about forgotten people and forgotten places. These are the people that I'm talking about. And Full Employment for All is advocating for a policy to include these forgotten people and places into the American economy. And that's all. So it's been wonderful being with you all, and thank you very much.
Appreciate you, Algernon. We're ready to get on out of here. I know tomorrow the full show is dedicated to Ukraine and what's going on there in that particular situation and everything. I do hope that you will make a return trip. As you can tell, it's a lively bunch and everything, but definitely we have engaging and wonderful conversations. I was glad that I found you through RTIR, but I hope that you will make a return trip, because a lot of the studies that you are talking about is stuff that we oftentimes talk about on the news show here on a regular basis. So I do hope that you will make a return trip, but definitely we're going to get out of here, because I know on tomorrow we'll be talking fully about what's going on in Ukraine. And if you want to stick around afterwards, I know that sometimes the folks are still around afterwards because we continue with our programming, but we end this particular broadcast. If you want to just join in some fun discussion afterwards, I would definitely love to do that.
I have to go, but I'll be happy to come back.
Sounds good.
Bye.